Well, Jeff, and good morning, by the way. I hope this finds you well.
I'm doing great, Doug, and I'm pleased that you're doing well as well.
Thank you. Now, over the course of your 35 plus years at the helm of both CUED and its successor, IEDC, what facet of the chief executive role have you found most satisfying, fundamentally satisfying?
So, I came into this position not as an association executive, but rather as somebody who spent 5 years at HUD and was comfortable with a fair amount of the substance of economic development. Cities were hurting in the 1980s. They were hurting in the 1970s. We were coming out of the 60s where there was real racial polarization. Our cities blew up in the 60s, and that's in fact how QED came about. It was called the Hub Council, Helping Urban Businesses. I don't want to go through the entire history, but what I think I got the most enjoyment out of is helping to advance our profession, mostly on the substance side. How do we do economic development better? How do we help people better? How do we improve the programs, both at the local level and at the national level, to help grow local economies? There were a lot of things you have to do and a lot of different hats you wear as a CEO. But if you ask where I felt the most comfortable, had the most interest, I wouldn't call myself a real policy wonk. I can point to people that are wonkier, but I really did enjoy that aspect of the job.
So, what have you found most challenging in your CEO career?
I think without question, as I look back, there were two issues. One, I was able to manage better than the other. I got by on the other. I think the whole issue of personnel management can be difficult for some of us. You don't know what people are bringing to work every day in their heads. You don't know if they're sick and they're showing up to work. You don't know if they're having difficulties at home. You don't know if they're looking for another job, if you've offended them in some way, or somebody else in the office has offended them. You don't know what motivates people so you can get the most out of them. And we just had our annual conference in Nashville, and I am able to say that there are a lot of people that worked at IEDC for a long time. So for them, I've at least created an environment, a home where they could stay. This next generation of workers, what is it that makes them tick, and are we going to be successful at keeping them around for a number of years and helping them grow their skills and contribute to the mission of IEDC? But I think without question, that's been my greatest challenge. I would add that I'm also terrible at removing people from their jobs. And I consider that a strength, not a weakness. Other people would say that's a weakness. We hired the person. It was a two-way street. And should we put them to the street because we made a bad hiring choice? We had the opportunity to look at them. We had the opportunity to do reference checks. And if we screwed up, they shouldn't be hurt as well. We need to work at that together and figure out, at least if we're going to let them go, give them a reasonable landing pad. So, we've always erred on when we on those rare occasions where we did terminate, they got a decent severance package so that it was not you're out the door, unless of course they were stealing from us or something like that. But we had almost none of that over my 35 years.
I've rarely heard that take on human resource management, the ethical dimensions. Very refreshing to hear you say that, Jeff. And by the way, congratulations on a highly successful conference in Nashville, I think.
It was, and it was successful in two ways, Doug, and I appreciate the notion. One, we had some really good speakers and we got a fair amount of compliments on the content. But second, we were very careful on the health side of this. You know, there's a lot of organizations that still aren't holding conferences, and there are a number that are, but we required vaccination out of all of our attendees. We required a recent test, even if you were vaccinated, before you showed up at the conference. But we still, you know, there were a couple people that we learned had it. Oh, we also had testing on site, so that if somebody hadn't gotten a test, they could test on site. So we were bound and determined we were not going to be a super spreader event. We were going to be something that in the same quality that we've tried to do things over many years, we wanted to do quality around the health issues as well.
To your credit, Jeff, you've long been well known nationally as a passionate and successful innovator in chief. As you think over your 35 plus years as a CEO, what would you consider the one or two most important innovation initiatives you've spearheaded?
So I'm going to give you the two obvious ones, and these are not hard. And then I'm going to talk about ones that maybe truly are more innovative. The first one is our communication with the board. When we were doing fine with our communication approach from the time I started till the time we merged, that 15 years. And part of communication is trust. Does your board trust that you're doing the right things? Does the board trust that you're going to deliver the way they've asked you to deliver? When we merged, half the board trusted me because they came out of QED. I wouldn't say the other half didn't trust me, but I had to sell myself and I had to sell better because they did not know that when I said I was going to do something, I did it. They didn't know that we had as much success, I think, as we had had in the past. And there were a couple of naysayers who, you know, didn't think I was the right person or did not like the merger. And the way we got by that is we started putting out a regularly scheduled report to the board, a communications device. We called it highlights. We just issued, so over the 20 years that we've been merged, I think we just put out approximately number 350, the highlights. We continue to do it. And there are two things that provides. One, it allows people who like to read an opportunity to sit down and read what we're doing. And second, and those who don't like to read, they refuse to admit that they haven't read it, but they're saying, good job. And it also reduces the amount of time I need to take at a board meeting telling them what we've done. They know. I have run into a few economic developers who are getting in trouble with their board And I suggested that they provide a communication device. I send them a few of ours as an example. Ours is well too long, by the way. But all of a sudden, some of their issue dissipated
Great.
because the board felt engaged, they felt ownership, they felt like they knew more about what was going on. And we also put metrics in there so that they could see that we were either meeting or not meeting some of the metrics that we had set out on. The second thing I was lucky about is financially, we turned the organization around. And I think for many of us, if you end up good on the finance side, they will forgive you on a lot of the other stuff. And I've been very fortunate that we've grown the organization, we've grown the fund balance, we've had, most of the substantial number of years we've added to the fund balance, we've had positive results. And that's hard work, it's discipline, and we've been lucky in that way. The couple of the innovations, and these are not real innovations, many people have ethics statements. I mean, when I joined, people wondered, is economic development a profession? Well, a profession has a code of conduct. We now have a code of conduct. The second thing is, and more recently, we've really focused on the issues around race and economic development, particularly in the post Black Lives Matter movement. We're doing a lot of things in that area, and our board is happy about that. And I think many of our members are happy about that. So those would be areas of innovation, I think.
Thank you. Now, as well as your role as innovator-in-chief, you're well known as an ardent board developer, and you wear that hat successfully and have for years. What would you point to as your foremost accomplishment on the governance front, wearing the hat of board developer-in-chief?
Well, Doug, you've been my coach. Not officially my coach, but you've been you've consulted to us on a couple of occasions, and I will tell you what I learned from you. Early on, you told me I wasn't spending enough time on board management, and we were much smaller at the time, and I didn't feel like I could carve out that amount of time that you had recommended that I work on the board. And over time, I was able to carve out more. I was actually able to also carve out time of other staff to work on board issues as well. Not necessarily board relationships, board issues. Second, as you know, when we merged in 2001, we had a horrendous committee structure. And that's when I turned to you. You happened to be walking through Washington. You stopped in my office and we talked, and I said, here's the problem I was having. And something had just blown up that was on top of mind at that particular point in time. And you helped me create a new process or a new structure. And what that did, that new structure, which we went from essentially a series of committee silos to some overreaching committees, so that a committee would have responsibility for the whole organization, not a particular area. And also became fewer committees, and I was able to sit through entire meetings. And frankly, I wouldn't want to use the word coach the chair, but in partnership with the chair, build the agendas for the committees and report to them what we knew we needed from the committee. And if we thought there were some outstanding issues that we could brief the committee chair on what those issues were before we ever walked into a committee room. Needless to say, with that approach, our committee meetings go genuinely flawless most of the time. So, and then we build up to a governance committee and then full board. And the only other 2 or 3 things that we do is, one, needless to say, we have a briefing time with new board members. We also, I take the incoming board chair to an ASAE CEO symposium, I think is what they call it. So I spend a couple days with my next chair a year ahead of time to talk about, how are we going to manage issues when he or she becomes chair. And then finally, regularly scheduled meetings with my board chair, to the point that I am good friends with virtually every past chair. Those relationships tend to go pretty well.
Good. Well, boards are people.
Exactly.
So
And
relationship building is a critical piece.
Yeah.
I assume you're close to your committee chairs too during their
Of course I am, but it's the chair relationship that can really, if it goes bad, your life's not going to be easy. If it goes well, you're still going to have places where you two may not see the world exactly eye to eye, but if you're friendly towards one another, you're going to work through it a lot easier than if you're on a regular basis having some difficulties in that relationship.
So cultivating that relationship with every new board chair is a key priority of yours.
Well, so because I'm so focused on money, we have a conga line at IEDC. They're first treasurer, then they're vice chair of the board, then they become chair, and then they're past chair. So I build a fair amount of trust, particularly when they're treasurer, because I am so focused on the bottom line, and that gives them a level of comfort. I'm building the relationship at that point. I probably have a relationship, a decent one, by the time they become treasurer, but then they're really seeing where I consider the rubber meets the road for the organization. Then as vice chair, it's almost a chair in waiting role, and then when they become chair, we're working on everything together.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in a somewhat different question. Of the many really important decisions you've made at the helm of 2 large associations, is there any decision you truly regret having made as you look back?
I think the decisions that I made, we managed 2 associations at one point. And we made the decision that was a core competency of the organization, was managing associations. We were doing a decent job of managing QED at the time, later to become IEDC. But we knew there were opportunities out there to manage other economic development styled organizations. We were successful in turning one of them around financially and putting the other on a better growth path. They both ended up leaving our tutelage, our relationship, one after 3 years, one after 10 years. And the mistake I made was not merging. What we should have done, in my opinion, in hindsight, is rather than manage for a fee and become the equivalent of any contractor they could hire or fire, is we should have brought him into our bigger tent given some of them board positions, and just merged, and as opposed to being a contractor to them. And I think we would have had a better relationship and a sustainable one, both for them and for the organization.
So a merger acquisitions strategy, as you
Yes,
look back, might have
yes,
made good sense and certainly would have built a
Yeah.
more robust organization.
well, and and then we did build a more robust organization by actually going through effectively a merger of equals. AEDC and QED were roughly similar,
Mhm.
and we, by merging, we got rid of a competition. Whichever side you were on it, you picked up economies of scale, and you became a more powerful, more important, more potent
Right.
organization as a result of that. I think that the other two organizations were much smaller, but I think we could have achieved the same by bringing them into the fold as well.
Out of curiosity, have you ever told what must be a very dramatic story, the full story of the merger?
Oh,
And
we've
the politics of it and
it
the
was
human.
actually, it was easier than you think. Um, and part of a non-for-profit merger is much more different than a for-profit merger. I've never been in a for-profit merger, but the reason people do a for-profit merger is because they're going to make money out of it. In a not-for-profit merger, there is nobody gets rich. Nobody walks away with dividends. It's all about ego. And, I was very fortunate in that our merger partners had a desire to merge. They also wanted me in their negotiation. They said, well, we know who the next CEO is going to be. And that was me, not their CEO, which was, extraordinarily gratifying for me and that whole notion. But that's also a second issue that can trip up a not-for-profit merger. Do you have two CEOs at the time, and are both of them possible CEOs of the new organization, and how does the merger negotiations manage that? We were able to skip that step. It was there was another merger going on at the same time, the merger of IDRC and NACOR. NACOR was the National Association of Corporate Real Estate Executives, and IDRC was the International Development Resource Council, I think. Both kind of real estate-y organizations. That merger took much longer, ended up with a breakaway republic, and Cornet Global, which was the outcome of it, is a very strong organization, but theirs tripped up quite a bit along the way. And ours seemed like a walk in the park.
Well, I'm sure, even though it was smoother than many mergers that you and I have seen over the years, it's still a dramatic story, and might be fun to do another interview down the pike a bit and talk about the ins and outs of effecting a merger that important.
And I will tell you, like I said before on a different issue, it was all about communication. You had to tell the members what you were doing, why you were doing it, keep them apprised on steps that the organization was taking. We were, QED had 2,800 members, and AEDC had 2,200, or we had 2,700, and they had 2,300. But we also knew there was 23% overlap. So when we merged, we became 4,000. But we also had to convince some people that QED had not lost its soul on serving cities. We were the Urban Economic Development Council. and AEDC had to convince its members it was not losing the certification or the education process that helped them move forward. Once we were able to satisfy both of those constituencies, we were able to move forward. We're now about 5,000 members, so we're much bigger than we were at merger.
And you've grown significantly internationally.
That's
I
correct.
understand, which is a huge coup.
Yeah. It was difficult not being able to have all of our international partners in Nashville, but we got as many of them as we could through Zoom.
Well, thank heaven for Zoom, even though I think all of us have grown a bit fatigued with Zooming. It's been a huge resource. Closing question, Jeff. I know you're extraordinarily busy, by the way, and I do appreciate your taking the time to chat today. But we've come to the last question. You'll be happy to know. You are sitting with the group of what we call CEO aspirants, senior managers, executives that who are very interested in taking the helm of an economic development organization. As their mentor, what do you advise them are the 3 or 4 most important steps they can take to prepare for the top spot? What's your counsel?
So we've done a couple surveys. They are in our publications catalog. I think one of them is free, maybe the other you have to pay a little bit money for. But we've done a survey of what are the attributes of a good CEO. And they're not surprising, but they include one, understanding the profession well. You know, if you're in economic development, you want to be able to understand not only the profession, but what are the major issues that the profession is doing. Second, you want to be really good at what you're currently doing. If you're a business retention person, be really good at that. If you're a marketing person, be really good at that. You want to be able to go into an interview with something that you excel at so that the board can see that you can excel. Third, understand that if you're the CEO, you're responsible for feeding all the people that work for you. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to raise every dime, but you're going to have to, if you work on government contracts, you need to understand how those contracts work, how you're going to raise that money. If you are, you know, head of a public-private partnership, how are you going to raise private sector dollars? You ought to have a good sense of accounting, and you ought to have a good sense of your own ethics and understand how to either work with a city council or a board. Now, you can grow into a number of those issues, but you ought to at least understand what you have ahead of you and how you can deal with it. Sometimes you may have to take a smaller organization to learn some of that so that you can step up to the next step, or you become a number 2 or equal number 2 at an organization and then compete for the top slot when it becomes open. But, you know, those are all easier said than done, but those would be some of the advice I would give somebody who's aspiring to be a CEO.
I assume, and that is sage advice to be sure, but I assume you over the years have counseled several CEO aspirants.
I've both have done that, and I've also counseled people who got bucked from CEO jobs. The people do end up losing jobs, and and getting back up to get back on the horse can be your ego is damaged. You have a lot of self-doubt, but people do, maybe not even for something they've did wrong, lose jobs. And I've helped a number of people figure out how to reposition themselves and how to go into that first interview, or how do you sell yourself when the newspaper says XYZ is out as economic development director in X city. So, and that's hard.
Well, sir, we've known each other for, oh my gosh, number of years. Can't remember exactly how many. I know we were a bit younger when we started working together. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share what you've learned as a chief executive officer for over 35 years. That's, by the way, that's quite a tenure.
Yes.
And so thank you so much. Have a great day and a good rest of your week.
Thank you very much, Doug. It's always wonderful to be with you.
Likewise.